welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking at a car that, well, it essentially serves as this towering bronze monument to 1950s Americana. I mean, the 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air.
Oh, absolutely. It's the quintessential 50s car.
Right. And, when you walk into a classic car show today and see one of these gleaming in the sun, there is this immediate assumption of instant reverence. You assume that when it rolled off the assembly line, crowds just cheered, recognizing the sheer genius of the machine right then and there.
Yeah, it's the chrome, the fins, the stance. It all implies this uninterrupted continuity of greatness, right? It feels like its iconic status was just, inevitable from the moment the design was finalized.
Exactly. It feels like the monument was erected the very next day. But when you dig into the archives, the historical narrative gets incredibly complicated.
Very complicated.
Yeah. So our central question today is whether the 57 Chevy's legendary status is primarily due to its inherent engineering and design brilliance at the time of its release, or, and this is where we disagree, if its icon status is actually a post-production cultural phenomenon that masks what was, at the time, a commercial disappointment.
Right.
To me, looking at what Chevrolet's chief engineer Ed Cole and design head Chuck Jordan accomplished, this car was an immediate engineering and aesthetic masterpiece. I mean, it rightfully earned its legendary status the second rubber met the showroom floor.
Well, I have to stop you right there, because calling it a masterpiece ignores the very messy reality of Detroit in 1957.
Messy how?
The truth is, GM executives didn't even want this car to exist in the form that it did. It was a commercial stopgap that actually lost its sales year to Ford. So I look at its so-called iconic legacy as something forged retroactively. It's built on drag strips and dirt tracks years later by people who are just looking for a cheap, used canvas. It was completely divorced from what GM intended.
Okay, but let's break down why that initial foundation was so incredibly strong, though. You have Ed Cole taking the existing 265 cubic inch V8 and pushing it up to 283 cubic inches.
Sure, the displacement increase was significant.
Right, but the true stroke of genius was the introduction of the ramjet continuous flow fuel injection system on the Super Turbofire V8. This is the exact moment Chevrolet hits that historic benchmark of 1 horsepower per cubic inch of displacement.
The famous 283 horsepower.
Exactly. Producing 283 horsepower. We really have to understand how fundamentally that changed the expectation of what a standard passenger car engine could do. And aesthetically, Chuck Jordan's team didn't just tweak the body. They dropped the car's entire stance by moving from 15-inch wheels down to 14-inch wheels.
Well, they moved to 14-inch wheels to fake a lower roofline without actually having to spend the money to redesign the whole greenhouse.
I mean, it may have been a cost-saving measure, sure, but the result gave it that wider, sleeker jet-age profile that basically defined an era. They integrated those jet aircraft-inspired bumperettes that look like artillery shells.
They were definitely bold.
Yeah. And on the premium Bel Air trim, they added exclusive gold anodized mesh grills, the gold front fender chevrons, and of course, those iconic ribbed aluminum tailfin inserts. They essentially built a baby Cadillac for the everyday consumer. The design was inherently brilliant.
But see, you are presenting the GM PR brochure version of history here.
I wouldn't say it's just PR.
It is, though. The reality is that GM executives were planning a ground-up redesign for 1957. They wanted a completely new car, but severe production delays forced them to recycle the 1955 and 1956 shoebox chassis for one more desperate year.
Which they updated beautifully.
But Ed Cole's changes were born out of absolute necessity, not some blank canvas visionary moment. And those changes drove up the cost of the car. If we look at the hard evidence of the commercial reality, the narrative of a triumphant masterpiece just collapses.
How so?
The production numbers were still massive.
Massive, but shrinking. Total Tri-Fi production dropped every single year. I mean, they built nearly 1.78 million cars in 1955, down to 1.62 million in 1956, and it fell even further to 1.55 million in 1957.
Well, and the ultimate metric of success in Detroit is the sales chart. In 1957, Ford completely redesigned their car, making it genuinely longer and lower, and as a result, Ford outsold Chevrolet for the first time since 1935. Chevrolet lost the year.
Okay, I'll admit, when I first looked at the sales data, seeing Ford beat Chevy in '57 threw me for a loop. It seems completely contradictory to the car's legacy today.
Exactly.
But you have to look at why that overall volume dropped. And it wasn't because the design was bad. It was partly because Chevrolet took a massive technological risk. They were the first to equip their cars with tubeless tires.
Which was a totally disaster for them at the time. We really have to put ourselves in the shoes of a 1957 car buyer to understand why that was such a big deal.
Right. Today, every car has tubeless tires, so we don't even think about it. But people in 1957 were entirely used to inner tubes. To them, the thick rubber tube was the only thing holding the air in.
Yeah, they genuinely thought that without a tube, a simple puncture would mean an instant catastrophic blowout at 60 miles per hour.
Right. Totally compromising the seal on the wheel. They didn't realize tubeless tires actually deflate much slower when punctured. So that innovation basically terrified conservative buyers right into Ford showrooms.
Exactly. Ford stuck with what people knew, and they reaped the rewards.
But to call the '57 Chevy a commercial failure because it lost the total volume more ignores the internal sales proportions of the model line. I mean, while overall volume dropped to 1.55 million, the premium Bel Air trim, the heaviest, most expensive, most luxurious version of the car, made up a massive 46% of all '57 Chevys sold.
But a percentage of a shrinking pie is still a shrinking pie. You're just slicing it differently to make it look better.
I see it differently. Think of it like a boutique luxury brand operating in a mass market space. Overall unit volume may have ceded ground to Ford, sure, but the Chevrolet consumer was deliberately choosing the absolute highest tier product.
So they were upselling the people who did show up?
Exactly. They were actively ignoring the stripped-down 150 model or the mid-range 210. Take the Nomad station wagon, for instance. Pricing on that stretched up to $2,900, which was astronomical for a Chevy at the time.
Oh, it was very pricey, yeah.
So when nearly half of your buyers are stretching their wallets for the premium trim with the gold anodized script and the aluminum tailfins, that proves the inherent desirability of the design. They weren't settling for a stopgap, they were aspiring to a premium experience.
Well, the boutique analogy assumes that people were buying these cars because they represented the pinnacle of technological achievement. But let's unpack those engineering milestones you brought up earlier, because the reality beneath the hood was far less flattering than the sales brochure implied.
You don't think the fuel injection was a milestone?
You cited the fuel-injected 283 V8 hitting 1 horsepower per cubic inch as this unprecedented mythical benchmark. It simply wasn't.
Well,
The Chrysler 300B achieved that exact ratio a full year earlier in 1956, producing 355 horsepower from a 354 cubic inch dual carburetor engine. And if we look across the Atlantic, Alfa Romeo hit it even earlier in 1954 with their Giulietta Sprint.
that's true, but
So Chevrolet had a fantastic marketing department, but they did not invent that metric.
they were the first General Motors vehicle to achieve it, though, and they did it by bringing continuous flow fuel injection to a mass-produced, moderately priced passenger car. That is a monumental leap forward from traditional carburation.
A leap forward in theory, maybe. In practice, on the ground in 1957, it was a total nightmare. Let's explain why.
Oh, the mechanics hated it.
Hated it. The ramjet fuel injection unit was entirely mechanical, continuous flow. It wasn't electronic like today's cars where a computer perfectly calculates fuel delivery. It relied on a highly complex system of vacuum signals and precisely calibrated nozzles.
Right.
Mechanics in 1957 were used to tuning carburetors by ear with a flathead screwdriver. Suddenly, they are handed this intricate system of vacuum tubes that required specialized diagnostic manometers they didn't even own.
It was definitely a steep learning curve.
And when these units developed vacuum leaks, which they frequently did, the cars ran terribly. The mechanics couldn't fix them. By the time Popular Mechanics ran their 1957 survey, buyers actively shunned the fuel injection option. They just went back to conventional carburetors.
It was definitely ahead of its time, I'll give you that.
And we see the exact same story with the transmission. Chevrolet introduced the Turbo Glide in 1957, which was a highly complex, continuously variable style turbine transmission concept borrowed from Buick.
Right.
How did the public react? They avoided it entirely. The reliability reputation was so abysmal that buyers actively preferred the older, simpler, two-speed Power Glide. So the so-called masterpiece technologies of 1957 were largely rejected by the people actually buying the cars.
I feel like you are penalizing Chevrolet for being ambitious. Yes, mechanical fuel injection was finicky, and the Turbo Glide had terrible teething problems, but engineering brilliance isn't just about what works flawlessly for a commuter on day one. It's about pushing the boundaries of what a machine is physically capable of.
Okay, but
Injection, despite its steep maintenance curve, proved itself exactly where it mattered most for a car's legendary status, which is in high-performance environments. The mechanics who did understand it, mostly racers, unlocked unprecedented power.
But that plays perfectly into my overarching point. The car's enduring legacy comes precisely from its scrappy second life in those grassroots high-performance environments, completely divorced from GM's showroom intent.
I don't think it was completely divorced.
It was. The 57 Chevy didn't become a cultural icon because Chuck Jordan gave it a gold anodized grille. It became an icon because it depreciated into a cheap, highly modifiable shell. By the 1960s, it was just an inexpensive used car. It became the perfect hot rod canvas because the engine bay was miraculously cavernous.
It was remarkably spacious under the hood, yeah.
exactly, it could swallow later, massive big block engines, or the 365 horsepower 327 small block that was introduced in 1962. It was teenagers pulling out the original factory drivetrains and stuffing in massive junkyard engines that made the car legendary on the street scene. That's what finally allowed Chevrolet to beat the Ford flathead hot rods that had dominated for decades.
But you're treating that utility as a happy accident, like it was a mere coincidence of size. It wasn't.
It absolutely was accidental utility. If you want proof of how accidental it was, look at why it completely dominated demolition derbies in the late 1960s and 70s. Ed Cole was certainly not designing a demolition derby car in 1956. It won because of quirky manufacturing traits.
Such as?
Well, if you're listening to this and wondering why on earth a specific car model dominates a demolition derby, you have to picture the arena. The first thing that crumples in a hit is the rear end, and up front, the radiator usually gets punctured.
Okay.
But Chevy accidentally built a battering ram. It happened to be the last year Chevrolet used a double-lined trunk, which combined with a remarkably strong frame made the rear end practically indestructible when drivers were backing into opponents.
Oh, wow.
And up front, the radiator was set unusually far back from the grille, making it incredibly hard to puncture. These are post-production phenomena. The hot rodders and derby drivers forged this legacy out of a commercial stopgap because it was just a cheap, hollow bucket of steel by the mid-1960s.
I love that you bring up how cheap and hollow it was, because ironically, the very architecture that made it a great disposable derby car is exactly what made it a lethal weapon on a dirt track.
Right.
But framing its success in racing as if it were just a hollow, cheap bucket that people threw better parts into, that ignores the fundamental geometry of the chassis. The racing dominance of the 1957 Chevrolet was a direct result of brilliant, intentional initial engineering.
Intentional for racing, you mean?
Yes, let's look at the dirt tracks and short tracks of NASCAR in 1957. The 57 Chevy earned the nickname King of the Short Tracks. Why? Because Chevrolet engineers intentionally placed the 283 engine behind the center line of the front wheels.
Right, creating essentially a front mid-engine layout.
Exactly. And the physics of that are crucial. By pushing the engine mass behind the front axle center line, they reduce the car's polar moment of inertia.
It's a great setup.
Think of it like a figure skater spinning on the ice. When they pull their arms in close to their body, concentrating their mass in the middle, they spin much faster and can change direction instantly. By concentrating the heavy engine mass toward the center of the car, the 57 Chevy could pivot and bite into the corners of a dirt track with incredible agility compared to its nose-heavy competitors.
Which was mostly Ford at the time.
Right. This wasn't something a teenager with a wrench figured out in 1965. This was Ed Cole's team in 1956.
The handling was a massive advantage, yes. I'll give you that.
And the proof is in the results. The 150 model, two-door sedan, specifically the fuel-injected version we famously know as the Black Widow, was so dominant out of the gate in early 1957 that NASCAR actually outlawed it.
They did.
You do not get outlawed by NASCAR because your car is a commercial stopgap. You get outlawed because your fundamental engineering is too superior for the competition to handle. The engineering didn't just passively accept the cultural phenomenon, it actively enabled it.
I will grant you that the engine placement, the polar moment of inertia, and the resulting handling characteristics were exceptional. The fact that the 1957 Chevrolet won 49 Grand National Cup races, which is the most of any car in NASCAR history, and won the Southern 500 3 times in a row, is an undeniable testament to its capability on a track.
Absolutely.
But we have to separate the stripped-down, specialized racing machines from what was happening in the consumer market. The Black Widow was a Spartan 150 utility sedan. It was void of all that heavy Bel Air chrome, it had no sound deadening, no rear seat in some setups. It was a purpose-built weapon.
Sure.
But the car that defines the icon, the heavy, luxurious Bel Air with the padded dash and the signal-seeking AM radio, was sitting in showrooms losing the sales wars into the 1957 Ford. The mythology conflates the utility of the race car with the aesthetics of the luxury cruiser.
I understand why you want to separate them, but you can't divorce the Bel Air's cultural impact from the 150's racing pedigree, because they share the exact same bones.
The same chassis, yes?
When a buyer walked into a dealership in 1957 and saw that wide, jet-inspired Bel Air sitting there, they were looking at a vehicle that shared the exact same suspension geometry, the exact same rigid rear roof structure on the hardtops, and the exact same powertrain options as the cars destroying the competition on the track.
But they were driving it to the grocery store.
True, but the 1957 Bel Air represents the ultimate synthesis of the era. It was jet-age styling wrapped around mechanical capability that was years ahead of its time. The fact that it influenced automotive culture for decades, inspired songs by the Beach Boys, and commands six-figure prices at auctions today is a direct testament to the brilliant foundation laid by Ed Cole and Chuck Jordan. It was an immediate masterpiece, even if it took the broader public a few years to fully comprehend the total package they had been offered.
And I maintain that to truly understand automotive history, we must separate the modern mythology from the historical reality. It is undoubtedly an icon today, arguably the most recognizable American car ever built.
Definitely one of them.
But in 1957, it was a stopgap model born of production delays. It featured advanced technology like fuel injection and the turboglide that proved too temperamental for the contemporary market, and its tubeless tires scared away enough buyers to hand the sales crown to Ford.
A temporary setback.
Maybe, but it achieved immortality not because it was perfect off the assembly line, but because its lightweight frame, cheap resale value, and cavernous engine bay made it the ultimate blank canvas for a generation of hot rodders. It is a masterpiece of the street, built by the people who drove it, modified it, and raced it, rather than a flawless diamond handed down from Detroit executives.
It is endlessly fascinating to me how the very things that made it vulnerable in 1957, the lightweight shoebox frame, the mechanical simplicity of the base models, are exactly what allowed it to survive and thrive. But I think there is a profound point of convergence here for both of us.
Oh?
Yeah. Whether you view its greatness as inherent or retroactive, we both agree that the 1957 Chevrolet represents a major, undeniable turning point in American automotive history. It was the vehicle that definitively shifted the street racing and hot rodding scene away from the dominance of the Ford flathead V8 and firmly established Chevrolet as the king of the streets for a generation.
Absolutely. The introduction of the small block V8 in 1955, culminating in that 283 engine in 1957, fundamentally rewrote the rules of American performance. The car changed the culture, even if the culture had to modify the car to get there.
Well said. Looking past a car's modern mythology to understand its complex historical reality doesn't diminish its greatness. I think it actually deepens our appreciation for it. It reminds us that icons are rarely born fully formed. They are forged through a combination of brilliant engineering,
commercial struggle, and cultural adoption. We hope this discussion encourages you to dive into the rich, complex history of 1950s automotive design and draw your own conclusions about what makes a machine truly legendary.
It's all about looking at the reality beneath the chrome.
Exactly. Because sometimes when you look closely at that flawless bronze monument in the town square, you can still see the scuff marks, the dents, and the dirt track mud that actually made it worth remembering in the first place.